This is a computer I bought off a guy on Facebook. I don't know much about it, and it was cheap. Like, really, really cheap. Too cheap, actually. Why was it so cheap? Is something wrong with it? What don't I know about this thing? Should we find out? Yeah, that sounds like a fun adventure. But first, let's roll the intro. Hello, I'm TechDweeb, and I'm an addict. That's right, I admit it. I'm addicted to root beer, and Duke Nukem 3D, and snuggling my cat, and to buying random crap I find on Facebook Marketplace. Sometimes it works out in my favor, like when I find some cheap GPU or other component and it works, and it's a great price. But sometimes my addiction leads me to dark places. Like when I buy something that I think is gonna work and it's a great price, but then it ends up not working or requiring so much time and effort to get working that it turns out I should have just bought a new one to save myself the hassle. I'm really hoping today's find is the former, the good one, because I can't take the crushing weight of failure much longer. Sooner or later, I'm telling you. If I keep getting burned by my tech hobby, I'm just gonna give it all up and leave all my tech behind and go live in a simple life in a cabin in the woods, as long as it has gigabit internet. So yeah, this is today's Facebook find. I just picked this up, actually. What is it? Well, it's a computer, obviously. See, you can tell by the case, the power supply, some sort of motherboard, a CPU cooler with what I hope is a CPU under there. The Facebook listing didn't have much information. The description just kind of said, partial computer, everything except a graphics card and storage, no issues with any of the components. Ordinarily, I would ask what was in it, but here's the thing. This was on for less than $100. I could tell by the photo what some of the stuff was. I knew that case, the power supply, and I identified the motherboard as an A320M board. And there was some sort of RGB RAM in it, and all that alone is worth well over $100. So rather than go back and forth asking what the stuff was and risk someone else snagging the deal out from under my bum, I just said, I'll freaking take it. Well, I didn't say freaking, but I should have, because it adds emphasis. So I went over to the guy who was actually really close to my house, and I gave him his money and got the PC, and I took it home, and then it was now, and then I don't know what happened because it's in the future. So let's find out together. First things first, we gotta clean up. This PC has a distinct odor. It definitely smells like vape stuff. I don't think you call it smoke. It smells like vapor, I guess. It's not unpleasant, sort of fruity. I don't vape or anything, but I don't mind the smell of it. But it does need a good cleaning, obviously. Gotta scrub off some of that dust and vape smell. I'm using my electronic duster with a built-in brush, which I love. Seriously, this speeds things up so much. I scrubbed off all the fans, and the dust covers needed some scrubbing. And opening the back, we were greeted with the most basic of cable managements I've ever seen. Well, I guess since we're in here, let's tidy this up. I actually really like doing cable management for some reason. I know, I'm a weirdo. There's just something comic about organizing cables, and it just feels so satisfying when you're done. I wish I had this sort of diligence when it came to cleaning my room. So does my mom, to be honest. Alright, now that the dust is off, let's see what we got. So this is definitely an ASRock A320M motherboard, which is an AM4 socket. I'm hoping it's some sort of Ryzen chip, maybe like a Ryzen 3 2200G or some other cheap chip. Oh man, imagine it was a 3000 series Ryzen, like a Ryzen 5 3600. Although I doubt anyone would pair a 3600 with an A320 motherboard. That's the big mystery. What CPU is under that cooler? Speaking of the cooler, it's not a stock cooler. That's pretty cool. It's an aftermarket Cooler Master cooler. And the case is a Cooler Master case too. I know this case. This is a Q300L. I've built in this case before. It's a classic micro ATX case for a budget build. It's super popular because it's very cheap, but it still looks like a sleek gamer style case with a side panel to show off those sick PC components, bro. We have lots of fans in it too. Look at that. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 fans. At least it should be nice and cool. Hopefully they're 4-pin fans so that we have the fan speed control. Otherwise that could be pretty noisy. And we have some RGB RAM. Corsair Vengeance RGB if I'm not mistaken. I'm assuming at this price that we have 8 gigabytes of RAM, but I don't actually know. We'll check that out in a minute if we could get into the BIOS. And we have Wi-Fi built into the motherboard. Not too shabby. Also, we have a 600 watt EVGA 80 plus bronze rated power supply. That's some good headroom actually, so we can put in a decent GPU in here without needing to upgrade. So let's see what we can do to turn this into a real working PC. For the system drive, I had this, an SSD from a previous system that got an upgrade. It's a Silicon Power 1 terabyte NVMe SSD. I think this will be fine. That's if I can actually use NVMe drives with this processor. If this processor doesn't support NVMe drives, like if there's an Athlon 3000G in there, then this won't work out for us and we'll have to use this SATA SSD, which is the cheapest SATA SSD that I bought off Amazon for a different project. But I'll just use it here if I need to. Oh, and as you might have noticed during the cable management section, I tossed in an old laptop hard drive that I had kicking around. It's a 1 terabyte drive. It was collecting dust in my junk drawer, so I figured why not slap this thing in here too for some extra game storage. Now, to save time, I'm gonna shove a GPU in here, just to make sure that we can get into the BIOS and see what we're dealing with. If the CPU doesn't have integrated graphics, like if it's a, I don't know, like a 3600X, then we won't get any display output using the motherboard video, and we'll need to use a GPU eventually anyways. So I'm just gonna start out with this GT1030, just for the first test of power on. And once I find out what processor we have in there, I'll pick a GPU to pair with it. I have a few to choose from, but we can't know much until we turn it on. So let's cross our fingers and try that now. Alright, first try. That's a nice surprise. I feared the worst, so the fact that it works is more than I was expecting, to be honest. Oh my gosh, check it out. We got a Ryzen 3 3100 CPU. That is way better than I was expecting. Wow. And look at this, 16 gigabytes of 3200 megahertz RAM. So since the processor is a 3100, that means we can run the RAM at its full 3200 megahertz speed. So like, why was this thing so cheap? Is it gonna start crashing or blue screening or something? Or catch fire? This makes no sense. I mean, maybe the guy just wanted to get rid of it because he needed the cash, or maybe he didn't know what the stuff was worth, or maybe it's actually gonna catch fire. That's still a possibility. Okay, well, there's not much else we can do here, so let's power it off and move on to phase 2, which is adding a GPU. Alright, so we could run some really solid GPUs with this processor. The Ryzen 3 3100, that's a 4-core, 8-thread processor. Runs at 3.4 GHz with a boost up to 3.9 GHz. It can be overclocked, but I wouldn't overclock any processors on this cheap ASRock A320 motherboard because it's definitely not equipped for overclocking. Still, that's a great processor for gaming. It could probably handle even a modern, mid-range GPU, but since I got this so cheap, I want to turn this into a super cheap budget build. So I'm gonna toss in this RX 580 that I found for about 90 bucks. I made a separate video about this GPU, how I got it, and I did some performance benchmarks. I'll link to that video in the description below. This will be a fine pairing for this sort of setup. We could go with a more powerful GPU, but budget-wise, this is probably the best bang for the buck that we could ever hope to find. So since all we needed was a storage drive and a GPU, I'm gonna say that this whole setup cost me 250 bucks. And I won't belabor the point, Windows installed fine, and here we are, up and running. There's our processor, 4 cores, 8 threads, and our RAM running at the full 3200 megahertz speed, and our system drive, and our GPU, RX 580, 4 gigabyte, with the most recent drivers installed. Before we get into any gaming, let's give the system a quick stress test. I didn't bother repasting the CPU or anything, so I want to make sure that we don't run into any thermal issues or crashing or whatever. If there's something wrong with the PC, well, now I'm gonna find out. This is the moment of truth. Did I find an amazing deal, or is it gonna suddenly explode, killing me instantly? If I do die, it was nice knowing ya. Thanks for always clicking like on the video, buddy. And yeah, it ran fine. The Cinebench ran as expected, and there were no thermal issues at all. We reached a maximum CPU temperature of 71 degrees. So that cooler is obviously doing its job, and I'm not gonna even bother repasting the CPU. This is just fine. And Unreal Valley Benchmark pushed the GPU pretty hard, but we didn't get anywhere near thermal throttling territory. We maxed out at 76 degrees. So for the gaming tests, I'm gonna give it a slight overclock, just 50 megahertz on the core and 400 megahertz on the VRAM. I have a video tutorial on how to overclock your GPU if you're interested. There's a link in the description below. I'm curious to see if the temperature becomes a problem, but we'll check that out during the gaming tests. Okay, so I'm really happy with everything that's happened so far, and I could probably leave it at that, but come on, you guys have been patient enough. We know you're just here for the games, so let's get into some gaming tests. But first, Apple break. Yeah, it's Apple season here in Ontario, Canada. My favorite time of year. For apples at least. I freaking love apples, man. My mom and I went apple picking yesterday. I ate so many apples, you guys. Like, too many apples. My mom kept telling me to stop, but I didn't listen. I got a tummy ache. I fancy myself a bit of an apple connoisseur, if you will. My all-time favorite apples are ambrosia apples, but I also love Pink Lady, and I've been known to splurge on the occasional Honey Crisp. Stay tuned for the announcement for my second channel, DWEEB, coming soon to a YouTube near you. Starting off, as always, with Shadow of the Tomb Raider. Why do I start with Shadow of the Tomb Raider? Because shut up, that's why. I'm running at 1080p with the high preset, and it's looking very nice indeed at these settings, and I got an average of 59 FPS. That's what I like to see. When I build a gaming system, this is always the first game I try, and if it runs well, then I know there will be lots of games that'll run well. 59 FPS at high settings is honestly way better than I would normally expect from such a budget setup like this. Granted, you don't always find such an amazing deal on PC parts every day, but honestly, if you keep your eye out on your local marketplace, you'll be surprised what pops up. Maybe you'll find some components that'll let you build an entire gaming PC that can run Shadow of the Tomb Raider at 1080p with high settings at 59 FPS. You never know unless you look. Here's The Witcher 3 running at 1080p with the highest possible settings. You get an average of 56 FPS. This is an older game, but it's still a good one to test because it's very GPU intensive. That'll help isolate the performance of the GPU separate from the CPU. We have some more CPU intensive games later in the test, but the fact that we're getting 56 FPS on average with 45% 1% lows really shows what this GPU can do. It comes at a cost though. Look at that GPU temperature. This GPU is pushing itself pretty hard. I only gave it a mild overclock, and it's running almost 10 degrees hotter than it did in my synthetic benchmark at the start. It's not really a problem, per se. The game is running, it's not crashing, and apart from a loud-ish fan, it shouldn't be an issue to play games at around this temperature, as long as you understand that above 80 degrees you'll start thermal throttling. Of course, our actual PC build is helping here. We have 6 freaking fans after all, so if you had a setup with less airflow, this would definitely be more of a problem. The way I see it, as long as you're not reaching 90 degrees, which is the top end of what temperature this GPU is rated for, then you'll be fine to run warm. But for peace of mind and to keep the system a little quieter, maybe aim for less than 80. That'll work out better for most people. And now, on to some Doom. 1080p with the medium preset, we got an average of 73 FPS. I was expecting a bit more, to be honest. This game is a good balance of CPU and GPU, I find, and as you can see in the overlay, we're at over 50% CPU utilization the entire time. The 1% lows show us that we're not so bottlenecked that we're getting stutters or anything, and it's just the nature of gaming that some games will rely more heavily on CPU for high FPS, or GPU for visual effects, or RAM and storage for texture streaming, and if you're running a system that has a fairly balanced CPU and GPU, then you'll come across scenarios that one component or another is holding you back. Here I suspect that we're held back a little bit by the CPU, but just a little bit, as the 50 FPS 1% low numbers show. Honestly, running the game at these settings and getting 73 FPS is totally enjoyable. It's an older game though. We might find newer games pose more of a challenge for this system.
Demonic presence eliminated. Lockdown disabled.
And GTA 5 is another older game, but because it's so well optimized and it runs at such a high FPS, that means it'll put more pressure on the CPU. I'm running at 1080p with the high settings, which are the medium settings in this game, and I got 112 FPS on average. That's a great FPS. But again, I can see that CPU utilization is pretty high at times, up around 65% utilization. But if you up the visual effects, we'd put more pressure on the RX 580 and less pressure on the CPU, and that number would go down. Overall, I think this is a pretty balanced setup, and we haven't come across any situations that the CPU is posing a significant bottleneck. And I mean, I know this game runs on a potato, but being able to play games that look like this at 112 FPS on a $250 PC, we can't complain about much here. Let's step it up here and play some more modern titles. This is Red Dead Online, the online portion of Red Dead Redemption 2. One of the best looking games of all time, in my opinion, and one of the best games of all time too, in my opinion. I'm running at 1080p with the console equivalent settings from Digital Foundry, which is a mix of high and low settings to get the game looking great while not sacrificing too much of our FPS. As you can see, we got 64 FPS on average. And considering how good the game looks, that's freaking awesome. Again, our CPU usage is getting up there. Our Ryzen 3 3100 gets to around 75% usage at certain times. But if it was posing a significant bottleneck, then we'd be seeing some much worse 1% lows. Oh, and I should mention that the CPU temperature is absolutely great. While gaming, it doesn't go above like 65 degrees at the most. So overall, I feel that this is a good pairing. This GPU and CPU. And you could buy this GPU cheap. Like, I'm talking less than $100 on eBay. It really is amazing performance you get for the price, even with modern titles. Like I showed in my video on this GPU, there's a link to that below if you want to check it out.
Dear me! What's your...
Hey, what are you doing?
What the very... Please, no! Damn!
Spiderman Remastered is our first major hurdle. It's a much more CPU-intensive game than anything we've tried, and we do reach some significant CPU bottlenecks here. I'm running at 1080p with the medium settings, and I got 61 FPS on average, which does seem decent, but the game did not feel super consistent, and it was quite stuttery. At times, the 1% lows got down to like 10 FPS, and you can see that the CPU usage is very high, going up to like 80% at times. And those numbers are vague, to be honest. The FPS overlay doesn't capture the transient spikes in the CPU very accurately, just because it's not a super fast polling rate, so it only catches little snippets in time, so to speak. So if it's reaching 80% CPU usage in the graph, then that tells me that we're actually maxing out the CPU in the transient spikes, and that's what's causing our performance issues. However, to be fair, this game stutters a little even on my high-end system. I think that it has some optimization work to be done. It's playable here, no question, but the system's not equipped to handle it optimally, to be fair.
Next customer. This doesn't look good.
Another game that this system is not optimal for is Cyberpunk 2077. This game, as you probably know, is just about the most intensive game you can run, and it's not super friendly to older hardware. However, we actually did not too bad. 1080p, medium settings, but we had to make use of quality FSR to get that FPS up. And we averaged 50 FPS. That's good, not great, but good. This is about the right balance of settings to keep the game playing good, but still looking good too. I could play the game like this and have a good time. The CPU usage is pretty high, but the 1% lows are respectable, and we're not getting the stutters, so I'm gonna give this a win here. Hey, come on, man. Running Cyberpunk on a $250 budget build? That's cool. I feel cool right now. Oh, and by the way, the models and the textures loading in slow are just because I'm running this off an external mechanical hard drive. Kind of funny when that happens though. Look at this lady. And finally, let's check out one more new game. Elden Ring. This game has a 60 FPS cap, so there's no point in trying to exceed that. Actually, because I play this game with a controller, and because it's a big, beautiful, open world style game with an emphasis on exploration, I find that I'm okay with running at less than the maximum 60 FPS. I chose to go with 1080p and the high preset, which lets us average 47 FPS. The 1% lows weren't great. There were some stutters, but they were pretty few and far between, and they didn't really impact my gameplay to any significant degree. I'm not amazing at this game though, if it wasn't obvious. So maybe some of you Elden Ring pros would need to either lower the settings to get a higher FPS, or run with different hardware to achieve that, but for maidenless dweebs like me, this is just fine. A quick little addendum to the video here. After using the PC for a day, I noticed that one fan was spinning at full speed, and it was really loud. And I eventually found out that one of the cables had a spot where it had a small crack or cut. The connection had been broken, so I just put a tiny drop of solder on it, and that did the trick. So, I think I did alright with this Facebook pickup. Like, better than alright. I'm kind of blown away. I was convinced there would be something about it that made it worth less than $100. Like maybe there was a thermal issue with a component or on the motherboard, or power supply would die or something. But nope, this is freaking amazing. I mean, I haven't given it an extended test, but it feels like this is the sort of deal that only comes along once in a lifetime. And now I have a nice PC that I built on a budget and someone will be able to use and enjoy for a long time. Oh, and I've had a few people ask what I do with my PCs. Usually I offer them on my Facebook to friends and family without any markup at all. I just like being able to play with PC parts and tinker and build PCs and then get them into the hands of my friends and family who will appreciate them. But if I don't have anyone who jumps out on it there, I'll post it on Facebook Marketplace or Craigslist with just a little bit of a markup so that I can make a little bit of a profit that'll fund future endeavors, fund future videos. I could probably sell this PC for over like $500, but there's no way I'd do that considering how cheap all these components were for me. PC tinkering is just a hobby for me, and as long as I'm not losing money, I'm happy with this. And so is my mom, who pays for all this stuff. And that brings us to the end. I'd love to know what you think of this setup. Did I do good with this super cheap budget build? Can you recommend a different GPU that would have been a good choice? And what about you? Do you ever go on Facebook Marketplace or Craigslist or eBay or Kijiji or whatever, hunting for deals? Let's share some of our best used tech stories down in the comments below. I'd love to hear from you guys down there. And while you're down there, click that thumbs up button if you like the video, or the thumbs down button if you didn't. Subscribe so you don't miss any of my videos. As always, I'm TechDweeb. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.